The roots of Google Stadia go far, far back, much further than most people imagine. In fact, to 1992, 6 years before Google was actually even founded. That was the year that On2 Technologies, a startup from New York State, began developing True Motion, a set of video codecs designed for gaming platforms. The codecs were numbered sequentially with the prefix VP. In 2010, when Google acquired them, they were up to VP8, and under Google's ownership, they created a highly specialized codec, VP9, able to compress high-quality video with virtually no perceptible artifacts. Although the video compression technology used for Stadia may have the longest history, the concept of Stadia itself goes back to around 2013, when an ex-Xbox employee, Marj Bakar, joined Google to develop a new digital media player, the Chromecast, which was built around the VP9 codec. Bakar reckoned that although the media streaming service was great for video platforms, it was missing out on the biggest platform of them all, video gaming. As covered in a previous What's Up Rokk, the gaming industry now accounts for more revenue than cinema, TV and video streaming combined, and is growing exponentially. The team was brought together to explore the possibilities and answer the single biggest question. How can you possibly stream a high-end AAA title with all of its high-res assets and rapid gameplay across the internet from a server based hundreds, if not thousands, of miles away? In the last What's Up Rokk, we looked in some detail at how compression is part of the answer, but in order for Stadia to work, and more importantly work better than the competition, they needed to bring together some of the brightest brains and intellectual property that Google owned. The On2 tech team revisited VP9, and although the codec is open source, they managed to find ways to optimize the encoder, and exclusively for Google, so that any device that uses VP9 would still be able to render the results, but Google's proprietary new encoding would do things that nobody else had ever achieved. Stadia was starting to form. Project Yeti was the codename that a group of people in a 2-story building on the far corners of Google's campus were known as. Day by day they met and leaped over one hurdle after another, proving beyond a doubt that not only could their cloud gaming technology work, it could be by far the most innovative, years ahead of the competition. Now, Google had the motive and the means, but it needed the opportunity. To bring the as-yet unnamed Stadia to market, Google needed to bring a commercial team together who would not only share the vision, but have unprecedented experience in the gaming industry. In 2017, holidaying with family at Center Parcs near Stonehenge in England, a veteran of the gaming industry stretching back to the early 80s and culminating in heading up Xbox in Europe, received a surprise message from Google on Facebook. Within days, Phil Harrison was heading out to Google HQ to discuss an intriguing offer to head up a new cloud gaming solution. Google knew that Harrison was unique in the gaming world. Nobody else had both the experiences of being a game developer in charge of launching the PlayStation and head of Xbox Europe. But there was more. Harrison had also invested in Gaikai, a high-end video game streaming service eventually bought by Sony to become PlayStation Now. Harrison knew firsthand the challenges that needed to be overcome, and once he'd seen what the Google team had achieved, it was a no-brainer. He was on board. One of the first things that Harrison did was to go on a tour of all the major studios to excite them to the potential of Stadia. He knew without content the technology was virtually meaningless, and before they could reveal anything publicly, they needed the guaranteed support of some big hitting studios. A commercial case was made that not only ensured higher margins, but eradicated old demons of content creation such as piracy and IP theft. Although it would be a risk to launch with the platform, if supporting it paid off, it could pay off big time. Support secured, Next up, Harrison wanted content that would specifically show off the capabilities of the platform. But this was a difficult ask of studios who need to create games for a multitude of platforms under immensely tight timescales. So he set about bringing another set of impressive names to the team, this time to create a studio of their own. First up, Jade Raymond, legendary Canadian producer at Electronic Arts and Ubisoft, to head up Google Stadia Games and Entertainment. Jade immediately pulled together an A-list publishing team to not only work internally on content, but to guide and support external developers who wanted to implement Stadia's unique features. If Raymond's job was to maximize success for the platform in the short term, Harrison's next hire, Erin Hoffman-John, was very much cementing the future of Stadia. Hoffman-John is a true visionary in game design and hired to head up another new division, Star Labs. This studio, less in the public eye than others, is, to all intents and purposes, a skunk works within Stadia that has one aim: to push the technology to its absolute limits and then beyond. Understandably tight-lipped about progress, talk of incredible achievements abound. On June 2019, the team were ready to reveal Stadia to the world in the first Connect. Introduced by Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, who admitted to not actually being much of a gamer, Harrison soon took the stage and peeled away the wrapping to debut Stadia to an amazed audience. There was now no going back. In this episode, we will take a look at what happened after the public reveal to the present day. On June 6, 2019, Google launched a Stadia Connect on YouTube. Unlike the previous developers conference, this was purely for the players. For the first time, they not only announced the launch date, November 2019, but the cost of entry. In order to play Stadia on the launch date, players would need to pre-order a bundle of equipment called the Stadia Founders Edition, which at $129 included a Chromecast Ultra required to connect to a TV, an exclusive limited edition Night Blue controller, a unique Stadia player's name without any trailing digits, and 3 months free Stadia Pro subscription, which would eventually revert to $9.99 a month. There would also be a buddy pass with each pack, which would allow purchasers to gift 3 months of Stadia Pro to anyone of their choice. At the same time, they also announced a number of games which they said would be available at launch, including Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Division 2, Get Packed, and Guilt. Sadly, only the last of these made it out at launch, an unfortunate side effect of reliance on third parties, dynamic marketing timelines, and an evolving business model. On top of these titles, VP of Product John Justice revealed that founders would have access to Destiny 2 The Collection, which would include all the free and paid-for content for up to 12 months after launch, as well as being able to port across progress from other platforms. Justice also revealed Stadia Base. Base would allow players to purchase games and play them without paying the Pro subscription. However, all games would be limited to 1080p resolution, and there would be no HDR or 5.1 surround sound. As it transpired later, few games were 4K in any case. However, the added bonus for Pro subscribers would be exclusive discounts on titles that base players would not have access to. Pro was clearly aimed at the console or PC community, whereas base at the more casual or price-conscious player. Stadia would launch in 14 countries to begin with: Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, the UK, and the United States. Also revealed in June, Ubisoft announced that they would be adding Stadia to their Uplay Plus subscription service sometime in 2020. This was first-hand proof of how much work had been going on behind the scenes, and Ubisoft had been a very visible supporter of the platform, with a sizable chunk of available games coming from the stable. There was to be just one further Stadia Connect before launch, in August 2019, where further titles slated for arrival on Stadia were highlighted. Unfortunately, as we now know, many of these were unavailable at launch, or indeed within the first year of launch, and although this raised more than a few eyebrows in the early post days of launch, it's debatable whether the non-gaming market, as Google calls them, and most likely representing the main focus of the platform, were overly concerned. In September, leading up to the launch, Stadia ran out of Founders Edition controllers in Europe and introduced the Google Stadia Premier Edition Pack instead. This consisted of the same hardware as the Founders Pack, with the exception of a clearly white controller and no dedicated Stadia name. Shortly after this, the Premier Edition would go on to be the de facto pack to purchase in order to receive 3 months free subscription and a buddy pass, although controllers and Chromecast Ultras would be available separately if preferred. In October, a month before launch, Google Stadia opened their first dedicated game development studio in Montreal, Canada. This was exciting news as it further demonstrated the company's dedication to the future of the platform, something many were concerned about given Google's history of closing divisions that didn't achieve as hoped. Just before launch, Google announced that they would be releasing codes ahead of posting out the packs, and as soon as these were received, customers would be able to play via a Chrome browser. These were only released on shipment of the pack, however, and it became clear that Google were releasing these in batches, with few people getting them delivered in time for the actual day of release, and some not getting them for days or even weeks later. Thus began a bittersweet relationship with the customer base, and fodder for a soon-to-be-exposed army of negative content creators. Within a few days of packs and codes being received, a number of traditional gaming channels, publications and creators began publishing negative Stadia reviews. In some cases, this was due to attempting to play on the platform in suboptimal circumstances, for example, a shared office broadband connection. In other cases, it had no substance at all, and in a few instances the negativity came from people who had not trialled the platform or had any intention of doing so. Within the community of paid-up Stadia players, however, there were some concerns that the promised features were nowhere to be seen, and there was little communication from Stadia as to why or when these would be rolled out. Further to this, it soon became clear, as mentioned earlier, that many of the promised titles that were slated for release at or shortly after launch were failing to materialise. Stadia arguably did little to calm the concern by remaining tight-lipped during this period, a marked contrast to what had been a more prominent pre-launch communication strategy with regular press releases and executives readily available for interview. A week prior to launch, Stadia announced that there would be just 12 titles available on the platform. However, just before launch, they announced a further 10, taking it up to 22, thanking developers for working hard to get them ready. The free-to-claim games for Pro subscribers on launch were Destiny 2 and Samurai Showdown, but as the platform had launched close to the end of the month, December's parcel of free-to-claim Pro games arrived not long after, in the form of Farming Simulator 19 and Tomb Raider Definitive Collection. Farming Simulator had been on sale at launch, and purchasers were annoyed that less than 2 weeks after launch, something they had paid for was now free to subscribers. Stadia took a pragmatic line, however, and not only refunded those people, but boosted the version of the game to the highest available edition. Also in December, news broke that Stadia had purchased Montreal-based developers Typhoon Studios, who was shortly to release Journey to the Savage Planet, although, notably, not on Stadia. The purpose was clearly to help populate Google's recently opened development studio, and Typhoon's founder, Alex Hutchinson, would later become Senior Creative Director at Stadia. The first quarter of 2020 proved an up and down one for the platform. On the plus side, games continued to be added, slowly at first, but eventually in a steady monthly stream. But negativity around the platform from the traditional gaming press reached new levels of bias, with one story even claiming an anonymous independent developer stating that nobody wanted to develop for the platform because Stadia all but ignored them. With many of the titles on Stadia from independent studios and many more shortly to be released, this didn't make any sense. But it was clear Stadia was the platform the press loved to hate, and the clicks proved it resonated with traditional gamers too. In March 2020, Stadia Games and Entertainment, known internally at Google as SG&E, proudly announced another brand new development studio, this time launching in Playa Vista, California. As if this wasn't news in itself, what sent shockwaves through the media was who Google had attracted to run the studio. None other than Shannon Studstill, an industry veteran famed for her work at Sony and in particular on titles such as the multi-award-winning God of War reboot. In March 2020, amidst a global flu pandemic, Google's annual developers conference was moved online to avoid the risk of infection. The GDC Summit keynote was used to underline Stadia's commitment to working with some of the world's biggest studios, but more importantly, to launch initiatives designed to make the progress to the platform for independent studios easier. Stadia makers would provide greater levels of technical support, development hardware, and even financial support for studios that fit the criteria. At the same event, Erin Hoffman-John proudly revealed that SG&E had been working with UK-based Splash Damage, a studio well known for work on Halo, Gears and Batman titles, to deliver an as-yet unknown game. Clearly a significant body of work, Splash Damage have confirmed more information to be revealed in the coming months. In this final episode, we will consider what the near and distant future could hold for Stadia. To begin our journey into the future, let's take a look at what we already know to look forward to. Here's a list of features that are either already with us or coming in the very near future. Stream Connect. Co-op shared screens and larger numbers of concurrent players on a game server. The screens can be of any size, it's all down to the developer's design choices. State Share, which allows developers to turn in-game waypoints into a web link that people will be able to follow to play from the exact point in the game. The state could also include the loadout for a character, the level of XP achieved, specific bosses, etc. Family Sharing. Once purchased, a game will be available to other designated family members, and although at this point it's unclear whether they will all require a pro subscription or indeed whether Stadia will roll out a family-wide subscription account. Live Stream, which will enable players to stream their play live to YouTube and manage the connection from within the Stadia app. This can be public or private, by choice, which means that players can even store their entire game playing experience for later retrieval, if only for personal enjoyment. Crowdplay will allow players to join in another player's game that they are publicly streaming, perhaps via live stream. The watching player is added to a lobby where the streaming player can choose who to play with or allow play on a rotational basis. Trial Play. Game developers will be able to offer trial play of their games simply by adding a Play Now button to a YouTube trailer video, enabling people to sample the game for themselves for a set period of time. There has also been talk of other amazing features, such as the ability to harness hundreds of server blades or server-based PCs together to create massively powerful games that allow literally thousands of concurrent players in a single game, and other incredible scenarios. This points the way to what many believe will be Stadia's first self-developed AAA title, an always-on, massive multiplayer experience that will showcase features never seen before in gaming. So that is what we can look forward to in the near future, but what about a little further out? The one thing we've never seen from Google Stadia is a roadmap. We've learned of some of the exciting features that the platform will be able to deliver, and we've learned that they're developing their own titles. But Google's longer-term plans for Stadia have remained strictly locked behind closed doors. To be fair, even with a published roadmap, in these turbulent times things change rapidly, and this certainly applies to release dates. Another point worth noting is the competitive landscape. Although there have been cloud gaming experiments for some years now, the serious contenders are fresh in, with most yet to go public. Google was the first of these to launch publicly, but soon they will not have the landscape to themselves, and this may or may not affect their future plans. Certainly, it would be impossible to imagine that Amazon launching in the months to come with a highly attractive proposition wouldn't have an impact on how Stadia is marketed or its future plans. What we need to do, though, is take a look at some of the clues that have been dropped along the way in order to lead us to a logical conclusion of what future Stadia looks like. We know, for example, from keynotes delivered by partner developers at the GDC conference in 2019, that Google has its eye very much on the potential market of the billions of, in their words, non-gamers in the world. There is also a massive market of ex-players who enjoyed gaming at some point in their life but abandoned it because of education, work or family commitments, but would dearly love to rediscover it if it wasn't for the financial or time commitments needed. Stadia has the potential to be perfect for them, with no need for expensive hardware, lightning fast game loading times, etc. But the cost of games remains a prohibitor, especially if financial constraints is the biggest concern. If we take a look at how the games industry has developed, it's easier to see the challenges and possibly why it's ripe for disruption. Traditionally, games were sold in retail stores. Developers not only had to cover the cost of development and marketing of the game, but the cost of producing the game cartridge, tape, CD or DVD, its packaging, storage, shipping, and the margin of profit for the retailer, to name just a few of the production elements, all adding to the price the gamer would eventually pay. Over time, the internet matured enough for games to be stored on servers remotely and downloaded. Although this helped to reduce the cost of production to the developer, the platforms still took hefty slices, often higher than the retailers did, in order to promote and sell the title. So the cost of games has remained relatively high. Couple this with the scale of game development now rivaling and in some cases exceeding the cost of movie production, and it's easy to see why games cost $50 to $60, and that doesn't look like dropping any day soon. Enter Google Stadia. We know that Google's big plan was always to be the game platform of choice for everyone else. But how can they reach everyone else if everyone else isn't playing because they can't justify the high price of games? The solution could be threefold. First, develop your own titles and control the price. We know this is already happening, we just don't know how many titles are being built. We also know that studios such as Splash Damage, as reported in the last show, have been drafted in to add to the library too, so it's fair to assume that there will be more than a couple on their way. Secondly, maybe encourage studios to bring games to the platform that are no longer under contract with other platforms or at the end of their expected sales cycle, yet have a big enough reputation to still be attractive to gamers who are not worried about being the first to play a title. We've already seen this on Stadia to date, with most games, with notable exceptions, being a year or more older. This allows the platform to discount the game from day one to general players, but offer hefty discounts to pro subscribers. Thirdly, encouraging independent studios who are not tied to any large publisher or platform provider to develop exclusively for Stadia. Typically, these games are fairly simple affairs, although some are amazingly impressive, and most are great fun to play, depending on your particular style of play. The key thing is that the cost of development will be massively less than for a AAA title, which can then be reflected in the price. I call these pocket money games, and I fully expect these to form the bulk of Stadia's library within the coming months and years. With an average price of $10 per game across the board, no price to pay for playing, and with the enforced 1080p cap, reduced data constraints and internet speeds, this suddenly becomes the platform that anybody can just jump in and play on. Of course, this doesn't preclude brand new AAA titles from launching on Stadia, and indeed we can expect this from big publishers such as Ubisoft and id, who have already shown commitment to the platform with existing or promised releases. Further, as the traditional gaming market begins to disappear in favour of a more democratic, cloud-based playing field, even the traditionally expensive games will undoubtedly be more attractively priced, as we have seen on Steam for PC. Around this ecosystem will be other providers who will either continue to cater for traditionalists or create an as yet entirely new approach. Whatever this landscape looks like, it will be us, the consumer, that ultimately benefits, especially casual gamers who will find that gaming is no longer a night-long commitment, but can easily slot in between study, baby duties, work shifts, and just life. Finally, it's worth taking a quick look at what wonderful things are hatching at Star Labs, Stadia's skunk works run by Erin Hoffman-John. We could devote an entire piece to Erin's team's efforts, and we probably will in a future Stadia Rokks. But the main thing is that Star Labs literally exists to dream up new ways to exploit Google's cloud technology. They have already demonstrated some amazing, almost unbelievable technology, like the ability to take an existing game and bolt in multiplayer without the developer having to write a single line of new code. The concept of evolving a game using machine learning and artificial intelligence is mind-boggling. But given the unlimited power that distributed computing provides, we are at the dawn of a dream it and it will be so era. Imagine a future world where you fancied playing a game that's a bit like Call of Duty but looks like Destiny and has Super Mario Kart elements thrown in for good measure. Now, imagine a future Stadia where you simply choose what you would like to play from a menu, press a button, and let the supercomputers in the cloud build that game for you in a split second. Love it enough? Press another button and you can share with friends. Create something really new, press another button, and you can publish it to the store and take a cut in revenue. All of this and so much more is now not only a possibility, it's virtually a certainty. And there we must end our mind-blowing journey to the future of Stadia. If you thought our favourite platform was simply a carbon copy of what's come before, hopefully this has gone some way to opening your mind to the wonderful possibilities that are yet to come.